Hey everyone, I'm Gunkle Mark, and since you clicked on the thumbnail, I know what you're here for. You're so sadistic. You want me to talk about bad 80s music, specifically the number ones which were bad to start with or have aged poorly. And when it comes to bad 80s number ones, there's a big difference from the 70s. There wasn't a cheese factor or a campiness the way bad 70s songs had that could give you some enjoyment even when you knew it sucked. Now this could be in part due to the emergence of MTV as a force, not just on television, but in music as well. I don't doubt that there were some acts that started creating songs with the idea of how it would look on screen, rather than how it would sound on radio or in concert. Now, this focus on style over substance will be discussed for at least a couple of songs on my list. But even established stars would fall prey to this and create music that was safe and sellable rather than edgy and artistic. That edgy music would be made by newer acts such as U2, R.E.M., The Police, Madonna, Prince, acts that had nothing to lose by sounding different or pushing boundaries. In fact, several of them will be appearing on my best of 80s number ones list, but who makes it onto this one? Now keep in mind that this list is strictly number one, so you won't be seeing I've Never Been to Me or The Final Countdown here, thank goodness. And I know at least one of my choices will be controversial, but that's the nature of my list. Now let me know in the comments which number ones would make your list, and while you're doing that, don't forget to hit the like button, ring the bell for future notifications, and please subscribe to my channel. Now, go put on your members-only jacket and your Ocean Pacific shorts. That's a look. And let's start the countdown of my list for the top 10 worst number one songs of the 1980s. The Sweeney sisters knew how to do medleys right. Here's how to do a medley wrong. The two songs are considered rock classics, originally recorded by Peter Frampton and Lynyrd Skynyrd respectively. In an unusual occurrence, both songs had live versions reach the top 40, although Freebird had a previous studio version which peaked higher. Will to Power was the brainchild of Bob Rosenberg, a Miami DJ, and his then-girlfriend, Susie Carr. They had two songs which reached the top 50 before this became their pop breakthrough. Now frankly, I have no issue with Susie's voice. She's a decent singer and does a good job on her section. But Bob? Just because you can sing doesn't mean you should. The obvious problem with his voice is how wispy, whispery, and wimpy he sounds. There's no conviction to anything he's singing. He sounds like the real lead singer came down with laryngitis and he had to substitute for him at the last minute against his will. Absolutely unenthusiastic. But what's even worse for me is what a mixed message you end up with when you combine these two songs. On the one hand, you have a woman who's telling her man how much she loves him and loves being with him, and on the other hand, you have the man who's saying, "Hasta la vista, baby." Nah, he can't be bothered with feelings and emotions and needs to leave her far behind. What kind of masochist does this medley appeal to? No matter which side you choose, either way someone ends up losing, whether it's the woman being shunted aside by him leaving, or the man staying and ends up being stifled by her. Actually, there is one other person who always ends up suffering. The song's listener. If you think combining those two songs made for a bad medley, try combining 11. Disco medleys had hit the charts before, with both the Ritchie family's Best Disco in Town and Shalimar's Uptown Festival hitting the top 25. Although disco was on the decline in the US, it was still big in Europe. The man behind the song, Willem van Kooten, had visited a record store where he heard a bootleg single with medleys, including a song that he owned the rights to, the shocking blues Venus. This medley, called Let's Do It in the 80s Great Hits, what a horrible title, had a fake album company label and a fake group called Passion behind it. Willem decided to bootleg the bootleg to regain rights and create a real version, including the Beatles tracks that were sampled in the earlier song. He hired established Dutch singers to sound like Lennon, McCartney, and Harrison, and although the 12-inch version includes many other songs from the 60s, including Sherry and Only the Lonely, the 7-inch kept mostly to Beatles songs. Now, the biggest problem with this song is how the covers are forced to change their tempos in order to fit the beat, with the worst one for me being We Can Work It Out.
Try to see it my way, do I have to keep on talking till I can go on? Wanna see it your way, by the risk of knowing that our love might soon be gone. We can work it out, we can work it out.
The beat also has no changes to it, so it's just robotic and unimaginative. And the outro, which names drop songs, is just shouty and weird.
The stars on 45 keep on turning in your mind. Now we can work it out. Remember, twist and shout. You still not tell me why, and no reply.
But if there's a bigger reason to have this song on the list, it's for what came after. Stars on 45 managed to get a second top 40 song with a Stevie Wonder medley. But let's not forget that this inspired even more medleys of cobbled together bits of music. There was a Beach Boys medley, which at least didn't force a disco beat onto their hits. There was a Hooked on Classics and a Hooked on Swing. For a couple of years, this record spawned unoriginal copycats looking to make a quick buck. But for my list, the original unoriginal copycats deserve this spot. On my worst of 70s list, I had the Osmonds and One Bad Apple in the number 8 spot. If you want to see that video, click on the above link. And my main complaint about the song was how they purposely ripped off the Jackson 5. Now you'd think into the 80s we would not have another white boy band making themselves sound like a black boy band who hit the charts a couple of years before them. But the more things change, the more they stay the same. New Edition had been discovered by producer Maurice Starr, but after the band fired him due to embezzlement charges, he decided to create a white boy band. Donnie Wahlberg was the first hire, and his brother Mark was in the group for a short time before leaving to become Marky Mark. Do you know how many times I got called Marky Mark in the 90s? He recruited his school friends to join, and Joey McIntyre auditioned to become the last group member. The group was originally called Nynuk, N-Y-N-U-K, a lousy name which sounds like it came from the Curly Shuffle. Their first album didn't produce any hits, but their second album became a fast seller, especially after they toured as Tiffany's opening act, eventually becoming the headliner and Tiffany becoming the opener. Now, although I don't care for their music, I have to admit that You Got It, The Right Stuff is catchy. However, this song, which would be their second number one, is purely mockable. When you consider gangsta rap was making headway thanks to Public Enemy and NWA, the posturing in the lyrics of the song is laughable.
Don't cross our path, 'cause you're gonna get stopped.
Are we supposed to take these boys seriously when they threaten to stomp their haters? When they announce that they're rough, it's with all the ferocity of golden retriever puppies. And the music is similarly tepid, with flaccid arrangements that sound mundane instead of menacing. Of course, the teen girls this was being sold to loved the idea of these cute boys having a bad side and ate it up. On the other hand, their brothers had to suffer through hours and hours of listening to this. I wouldn't know from experience, my sister wasn't a New Kids fan. Just don't ask me about Color Me Bad.
7:59 a.m.
Ooh, I can't wait to put Milli Vanilli on this list. I hated Girl You Know It's True with that obnoxious voice from the first moment I heard it. Let's see when it was number one. Huh? Are you kidding me? It was never number one? Great, what am I supposed to do now? Okay, they had 3 other number ones. How am I supposed to choose between them?
A little longer than a few minutes later.
Oh, screw it, they're all going on this list. Milli Vanilli was the brainchild of Frank Farian, who was also responsible for Boney M, the hit European act, whose male member, Bobby Farrell, also lip-synced his performances because it was actually Frank doing the singing. Although Rob Pilatus and Fabrice Morvan had recorded an album in Germany together, it was their distinctive looks that got them in to meet Frank. After hearing their demo for Girl You Know It's True and realizing that their voices would never cut it, he decided to have them perform the songs on stage and lip-sync the studio vocalist's tracks. The two signed contracts without ever reading them and realizing that their real voices would never be used on their records because they were poor and looking for fame. But once they started hitting it big, they fell victim to their own hype. I expect most people began thinking something was up when you'd hear two guys singing in perfect English while they spoke like Hans and Franz.
And we want to pump you up.
Forgetting that, let's just focus on their music, which is uninspired by the numbers hip-hop. If I had to choose just one of their 3 number ones as the worst, I'd choose Baby Don't Forget My Number, which features a migraine-inducing drum track and one of my least favorite lyrics of the 80s.
Love is stronger than thunder.
Is thunder strong? It's just sound waves. The reason I decided to have all 3 of their number ones in this spot is because they ended up as the apex of what was wrong with MTV in the 80s. They were handsome, flashy, and who cared about their music? The songs were interchangeable and barely distinguishable from one to the next. They were a commodity packaged by Frank Farian and sold like fast food. And just like fast food, Frank's music helped satiate a temporary hunger, but was unsatisfying in the long run. What happened after their downfall, especially the death of Rob Pilatus, should be a lesson for anyone who thinks about selling their soul for a chance at music glory.
It's a tragedy for me to see the dream is over, and I never will forget the day.
Because I'm bad, you're more. You know I'm bad, you know it.
Milli Vanilli wasn't the only act for whom style over substance was the reason for their success. There was another band that preceded them which, at least, played their own instruments and sang their own songs, and their videos were constantly played because they knew how to sell their image. When it comes to their music, though, this is my controversial opinion time! And I know some of you will strongly disagree, but here goes. Duran Duran is one of the worst acts of the 80s.
You got too far this time.
I have 2 specific reasons for feeling this way. First, Simon Le Bon has one of the most grating, off-key voices I have ever had the displeasure of listening to. When he's in his lower register, he sounds like Bobcat Goldthwait with his chirpy hiccuping. But when he attempts to hit high notes, forget it. His screeching becomes more unbearable with every second. You feel like his voice will crack at any moment. See? The other reason why I grew to hate them was their songwriting. Their first hits from the album Rio didn't bother me other than Simon's voice, but the songs from their next album, including New Moon on Monday, Union of the Snake, and especially The Reflex, all sounded to me like pseudo-philosophical bull feces to try to make themselves sound deep and intellectual like my favorite band, The Police, but instead showing off how vapid they really were. don't even want to know what these lyrics are trying to convey because it fails miserably for me. And I can't forget the production, which includes a jumble of jagged notes and computerized samples of Simon's obnoxious vocal tics.
Flames on the side of my face.
I had thought about putting A View to a Kill here, but as bad as that is, I'm giving it a pass because Bond themes are almost always forced to fit the song and lyrics around the title, and A View to a Kill is a really awkward title. The Reflex, on the other hand, was on purpose. When I first conceived this list, I really expected this to be number one. You could say it was a reflexive response. But when I saw what else was out there, this is the right spot for it. One of the most derided bands of the 80s and into the 90s was UB40. A good number of critics have called out the band for their tendency to cover songs and add a reggae beat without improving the song or sometimes making it worse. Red Red Wine, I Got You Babe, The Way You Do the Things You Do, Can't Help Falling in Love, you get the idea. But there's another act that covered a hit song and added a reggae beat to it, and they make UB40 sound like Bob Marley. Club Nouveau formed after a previous band, Timex Social Club, broke up. You might remember their one hit, Rumors, a pretty bad song in its own right that I actually liked at one point. Club Nouveau technically had two hits, with the second just barely cracking the top 40, but are usually considered a one-hit wonder as well. The original was a number one hit for Bill Withers and is a soul classic. This version adds a droning electronic drum track that overpowers any melody, along with computerized scatting that sounds insipid. Two leads trade off during the song, the first being a low talker who is barely understandable.
Swallow your pride. If I have pain, you need to borrow.
And the second using melisma as a crutch because they can't hold a note or even find one.
Lean on me when you're not strong, and I'll be your friend. I'll help you carry on.
It's also punctuated by staccato keyboard notes that sound like someone slammed their hand onto it without trying to make an actual chord. And when you add that all together, it makes for a bad song. But then comes the moment where it crosses from bad to truly lousy.
We be jamming, we be jamming, we be jamming.
You know what that is? That is what an uncool dad says when he's trying to sound cool. We be jamming, kids! You know who can get away with saying this? Stevie Wonder.
We jamming, 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 jamming.
You know who can't? These guys.
We be jamming.
This is phony wannabe reggae that can't muster up any real effort or energy. Saying this is lackluster would be a compliment. If you want to listen to real reggae, ska, or two-tone, don't call on this.
Just call me when you need a friend. Oh, baby, now.
Because I'm bad, Jumbo. You know I'm bad, you know it.
And speaking of a lack of effort or energy,
Aruba, Jamaica, ooh, I wanna take you, Bermuda.
some of you may not realize that the Beach Boys were still regularly on the charts into the 70s and 80s. I mentioned their hits medley earlier, and that peaked at number 12 in 1981. The year before Kokomo, they hit number 12 again with a cover of Wipeout featuring the Fat Boys. And if ever there was an instrumental song that never needed lyrics added to it, That was it. Plus, it was a complete and blatant money grab, riding the coattails from Run DMC and Aerosmith's far superior Walk This Way. So that should have prepped us for the lameness to come when the movie Cocktail came out and for this song's appearance on the soundtrack. The youthful Beach Boys and surf rock had long given way to bland yacht rock going back into the 70s. I mean, seriously, listen to their cover of rock and roll music and tell me they weren't phoning it in then. Plus, they were Ronald Reagan's favorite act, as if that's supposed to cement coolness. And if this was their swan song for the charts, it's a terrible way to go out. First, the overall vibe of this song is meant to sound relaxed, but comes off bored out of their minds and going through the motions.
Get out to sea, and we'll perfect our chemistry.
Second, Kokomo doesn't exist. Look on a map. There's nothing off of Florida with that name. Now, I realize it's supposed to be a state of mind for relaxation, but you can use an actual place instead of making one up. It's as bad an 80s title as Sussudio, and we'll get to that one later. Third, there is one problematic lyric for me that, in the context of that era, is troublesome. A history lesson for those of you who weren't around then. In the 1980s, Haiti was run by a dictator named Baby Doc Duvalier and his secret police, the Tantan Makut. The US forced him out in 1986 and he went into exile, but the country went into further turmoil. In fact, in 1988, when this song was released, there were 2 coups against the government within months of each other. So the idea of visiting the capital to catch a glimpse while all this unrest is going on is either naive or ignorant. Then again, the Beach Boys were pretty much in their own bubble, barely evolving or straying from anything that made them popular, especially after Brian Wilson's well-known mental health struggles. Whichever way you look at it, this song represents both the last hurrah and nadir for the Beach Boys. The 80s seemed to be an introspective time when it came to message music. There were almost no protest songs to be found, but there were many songs that wanted to talk about issues in a sensitive way. Now, the problem with this sensitivity is it would turn the songs sappy and overwrought with emotion, giving them an unpleasant passiveness. For example, USA for Africa's We Are the World. I'm giving this song a mild pass since it was a fundraiser, but it fits this theme perfectly. Relevant and timely social topic?
There are people dying.
Check. Urgency?
We are the world.
Check. Soft grandmother music? Double check. But assisting famine victims wasn't the only social topic covered on bad songs. Let's talk about homelessness.
She calls out to the man on the street.
Phil Collins is maybe the most problematic artist of the 80s. When he was good, he could be really outstanding, but when he was bad, he was terrible. Part of it could be attributed to Phil as a person, and I know we should hone in on the music, but it's hard to look at his stunt during Live Aid, where he performed in London and immediately flew to Philadelphia to perform there the same day, and not see this as an egotistical way to pull focus to himself instead of the message. Besides his egotism being reflected in his music, he comes off as the embodiment of corporate rock, one of the biggest sellouts, going from the prog rock of early Genesis and his former bandmate Peter Gabriel to safe, bland, meaningless pop that sells like pop. I mean soda pop. So when he creates a song that tries to show real depth and humanity, it comes off disingenuous and manipulative. The cloying arrangements, the calculated lyrics,
He can see she's been crying. She's got blisters on the soles of her feet.
the pleas to Jesus,
Oh, Lord, there must be something you can say.
I'm surprised surprised he didn't borrow the children's choir from Mike and the Mechanics' The Living Years to really up the tearjerker factor. And maybe he actually donated to homeless charities, in which case, good for him. But for me, it all comes off as a cynical ploy to show sensitivity and keep his name on the charts. This was the fourth of 4 consecutive number ones for him and was the last number one of the 1980s. What a lousy way to end the decade. We're not done with meaningful topics yet. Just as homelessness is an ongoing issue to this day, so is racism. Whether it's critical race theory, Black Lives Matter, or you go back to Rodney King, or MTV's lack of black artists during its earliest years, racism is a part of it, whether it's intentional or not. And I'm not so jaded that I can't appreciate the efforts of those trying to solve this issue, even though for me, as long as people are different, there will always be those who fear and hate the different. That's just how humans are. But what I don't appreciate is a naive approach that glosses over any underlying and pre-existing problems and sugarcoats it into feel-good, kumbaya pablum. These two superstars should have known better.
Ebony and ivory.
You can say choosing this song on my worst list is low-hanging fruit, but it's still warranted. I don't know what happened with these two, but it looks as though this decade depleted their creativity. Paul seemed to become desperate after John Lennon's death to remain relevant with his duets with Stevie and later with Michael Jackson. This song was recorded just 3 months after John died. After writing this song, Paul wanted to make sure he sang it with a major black artist to continue the theme of racial harmony. Stevie agreed, and the two recorded the song together in 4 days. The song was released the next year and became a massive international hit, hitting number 1 in 11 countries. The arrangements are syrupy sweet, and the lyrics come off as though they were written for children to sing at an elementary school recital. I mean, seriously, I can imagine a group of second graders singing this to an audience of their parents and teachers. Ugh, that sounds like torture. Paul has been accused of writing saccharine songs in the past, but nothing could surpass this. I've been using a lot of sugar metaphors during this review, but this song is more like sorbitol, the sugar substitute that's used as a laxative. Or more to the point, the final result from using laxatives. And since I could use a break, let's go over my choices for dishonorable mentions.
It's hard for me to say I'm sorry.
Peter Cetera.
Hello, is it me you're looking for?
No, you are not.
I just called to say I love you.
Stevie, what happened? How could you go from Superstition and Sir Duke and Master Blaster Jammin' to this? I blame that Ebony and Ivory session.
We are the world. We are the children.
Just because this was a charity single doesn't mean it shouldn't be reviewed for the quality of the song. And this is a case of too many chefs spoiling the broth. Just the title alone would be enough to put it on anyone's worst list, but it's also a migraine-inducing cacophony. Time may be kinder to this song than when it was first released, but it still sounds like soulless corporate rock. would otherwise be a tepid slow jam, but then comes that lyric. That one insipid lyric. No, I just can't.
Shake down, break down, take down. Everybody wants into the crowd alive.
What is it with these two similar titles? Well, in this case, it's a huge disappointment for Detroit's best rocker. For me, it's surprisingly listless with that forced energy that comes from movie soundtracks. And this is from the man who gave us Ramblin' Gambling Man and Hollywood Nights.
Not great, Bob.
Here's a little song I wrote. You might want to sing it note for note.
I didn't have the hate for this song as so many others have had, but then came that commercial a couple of years ago. Suddenly I understood. Eggs, milk, bread and cheese, toilet paper, garbage bags, TV dinners, coffee filters. Don't forget the grain-free cat food. A list is not a song. When it comes to music criticism, we all have our biases. And I will admit that there are some critically favorite songs that leave me scratching my head and wondering if we're listening to the same song. One of my favorite websites to visit is acclaimedmusic.net, which has compiled lists of best songs and albums that were released even before 1900, and has ranked them into a group of the 10,000 best songs and 3,000 best albums of all time. And some of my songs on my worst list can be found on that best list. For example, as of today's taping, The Reflex is number 5,721, and Another Day in Paradise is 8,333. But even if a song on my worst list is not in the top 10,000, for good reason, most of the time, if it's not a one-hit wonder, the artist will have at least one song on that list. Even New Kids on the Block and Milli Vanilli have a song on that list. But for my number one choice, this singer has nothing on the list, and they're not a one-hit wonder. In fact, they had 2 number ones in the 80s and a couple more top 10s during their solo career. Overall, they ended up with 11 songs that hit the Hot 100. But not one of their singles or album cuts was deemed good enough by critics to merit a spot on this aggregate list, not even as an honorable mention. How bad must you be for this to happen? How bad is your music that no matter how popular you are, you don't have any one of your solo songs among the top 10,000 best of all time? Who could be so bad that Milli Vanilli is more critically acclaimed than they are? Peter Cetera.
Tonight it's very clear as we're both lying here.
I joked in my first video ever that he is evil incarnate, but he, along with producer David Foster, has been blamed for turning his former band Chicago from interesting jazz rock fusion to adult contemporary so blah they made bread look like Led Zeppelin. Any critical acclaim that they had received tended to be on their earliest work, such as 25 or 6 to 4. On their 1973 album, Chicago 6, there was a song called Critics' Choice, which was a response to the negative reviews they'd gotten. So even before the accidental death of Terry Kath, there had been changes going on in regards to the sound of the band. After Terry's death, this change was complete. Peter would stay the lead singer until his acrimonious split with them in 1985. He had asked the group for an arrangement to make solo records similar to Phil Collins and Genesis, which they wouldn't agree to. But as far as I can tell, there's no difference between what he sang with Chicago and his solo efforts. In fact, when Glory of Love was released, it was attributed to Chicago because it sounded exactly like their music. Everything Peter sings is either a love song, a hookup song, or a breakup song. Even Lionel Richie would write a party song once in a while to break up the monotony. But this is what Peter Cetera is. Monotonous, boring, basic.
You're basic.
Peter originally wrote the song for the end credits of Rocky IV, but it was rejected. When you look at the lyrics, they scream insert action movie name here love song. It could be placed into any Jean-Claude Van Damme movie and it would fit. When I chose my worst number one song of the 70s, it was because it was ear-splittingly ugly. In this case, this song is so milquetoast and bland that it's indistinguishable from any movie soundtrack love song or any of his former band's songs. When it comes to his success, I compare Peter to Mike Love from the Beach Boys, someone who not only got stuck in a rut, but enjoyed the rut. They enjoyed the safety of never changing their music, never wanting to change their music, and even when they made music away from their original band, what they created was identical to what they recorded before. You can criticize Phil Collins and Paul McCartney for making bad songs, but at least they made music that sounded different from their original bands. When song after song you release are cookie cutter with uninspired lyrics and arrangements, there's a reason why you will never be respected and why your music is ultimately dull and forgettable. And this is the epitome of your work. A lame, secondhand cast-off from one movie soundtrack refitted into another to become a hit because everything you write and sing is formulaic and generic. It is the perfect Peter Cetera song, and therefore it's the perfect song to place as my worst number one song of the 1980s. Well, now that that's over with, what do you think? Did I not include one of your least favorites, or is one of your favorites actually in my worst list? Let me know in the comments. And please keep in mind that this is just one man's opinion and these songs are over 30 years old, so I have no influence on their histories. Many people still enjoy these songs no matter what I say. But I appreciate you listening to me vent, and if you appreciated this video, go ahead and click the like button. Don't forget to ring the bell for future notifications, such as my top 10 best number one songs of the 80s, which I hope to have ready for you soon. And please subscribe to my channel. Again, I thank you for watching. I'm Gunkle Mark. Take care of yourselves, and I look forward to your next visit. Whew, I got through that whole video without swearing once. Yeah.